Welcome to Brooklyn Arts Council's podcast, Art of Social Innovation, where we explore the powerful intersections of creativity, community, and transformative leadership. Today's episode will feature an insightful conversation between two visionary Brooklyn leaders, Desiree Gordon, former Director of Innovation, Grants, and Strategic Partnerships at Brooklyn Arts Council, and now Executive Director of Ifetayo Cultural Arts Academy, and Rasu Jilani, Social Sculpture and Executive Director of Brooklyn Arts Council. Rasu and Desiree are the strategists behind the groundbreaking Creative Equations Social Innovation Fellowship, a program developed by Brooklyn Arts Council and New York State Council on the Arts. Over 5 months, this program equips 10 fellows who represent the incredible diversity and innovative spirit of Brooklyn with the tools to make lasting social impact. This conversation will take us behind the scenes, exploring what it takes to shape the future of the arts. So settle in and join us as we dive into this inspiring conversation on art of social innovation.
Hi, I'm Desiree Gordon. I am a singer-songwriter, I'm a creative strategist, I am a cultural maker and a sweet mother. I am also currently the executive director of a 35-year-old organization called Ifetayo Cultural Arts Academy.
Peace, y'all. My name is Rasu and Jilani, executive director of Brooklyn Arts Council. We sit here at Ifetayo with the executive director of Ifetayo, my sister Desiree Gordon. When I think about social innovation, I think about how do people problem solve with the resources that they have? And that innovation comes from a place of resilience, possibility, and also working together. So to take us back to the connection, the symbiotic connection between Des and I would have to go back to the pandemic, right? Specifically coming out of working out of New Museum in an incubator and then being in philanthropy. The previous leader of Brooklyn Arts Council, Charlotte Cohen, reaches out to me and is like, there's somebody I really want you to meet. They're brilliant, they're really rethinking programs and strategy at Brooklyn Arts Council. We know that you do a lot of social innovation, creative entrepreneurship, and she's thinking about this too. We're building an advisory group, that's what was the advisory group,
Absolutely.
Right? Building this advisory group, and I want you to be in the advisory group, but specifically to work with, to be kind of like a bucket of ideas with Desiree. And I just remember it was like during the pandemic, you called me and we had like this amazing conversation about ideas. And I now fast forward, the ideas is really about the Creative Equation Fund, but it was like the early renaissance of these ideas. Can you talk about that and how me being on the other side, your perception of me being on the other side of that conversation?
Okay, Creative Equations Fund. Creative equations is a concept that sort of suggests that any equation that you have to solve a problem is not as complete, is not as funky, is not as innovative or effective if it does not have a creative solution to it. And Brooklyn Arts Council has this long established grant-making practice. So many people owe their start to a Brooklyn Arts Council grant, but we did not have in our practice a practice of investing in social justice and a practice therefore of affirming the artists and the organizations that are in Brooklyn that do dedicate their creativity to justice, equity, and sustainability, right? And so, it was about, I think when we were reaching out, it was about trying to find a way to articulate the relevance of this kind of giving practice and investment practice and innovation practice to the way that Brooklyn Arts Council was currently seeing itself. It was in many ways at the beginning of really helping the organization so that it see itself in an innovation frame, see itself in a future frame, and begin to weave that thread through the various verticals of the organization, because Brooklyn Arts Council is so dynamic.
Yeah, indeed. And innovation is important, especially when you think about grant making, because grant making can easily become stale. and become this very linear practice. So
And
kudos to
actually,
you.
no, kudos to you too, because I remember then we identified a few folk. It was yourself,
Yago, I think.
Yago, trans stories to save trans lives.
Yes.
What was the sister's name?
I don't remember.
A grantee, if it Brooklyn Arts Council grantee, we'll name it again, who also showed up for a meeting that we asked you all to be a part of. We were
Yes.
pitching the general frame, objectives, and wanted to really get a sense of, how is this resonating? Is it so? I think that was the beginning of our sort of thought partnership and collaboration on making big things happen.
Yes. And this is all before it became ED.
Yes.
So just for
Yes.
context.
Yes.
So one of the things I started to notice during the pandemic was, especially coming from this kind of amalgamated art space, I always call myself discipline agnostic. Not a painter, not a performer, but I've worked in all of those spaces and started to realize there were new forms emerging, right? But beyond the forms, remember at the time of the pandemic, cultural institutions were shut down. Right, so through COVID mandates, dancers couldn't really, they had to dance in the street or dance in parks. What I started to see was the community started to respond to the need, right? The community yoga studios started opening up and bringing dancers inside. Vintage shops started galvanizing artists to think about the next art practice. Cafes started holding conversations with artists inside the cafes, and so on and so forth. So what started to emerge was this idea of emerging institutions. Beyond emerging practices, there were emerging cultural institutions that were for-profit businesses, like traditional businesses in the neighborhood. This is social innovation. So thinking about this is that we cannot leave community out of the conversation when we think about the cultural or creative economy or the cultural ecosystem of Brooklyn, right? Oftentimes we'll knight the big institutions like a Brooklyn Museum, like a BRIC, like a BAM, like a Brooklyn Children's Museum, or even a Brooklyn Arts Council as the cultural ecosystem. That is nearsighted and quite frankly myopic. Culture is created in the streets. The institutions preserve the culture that's created by the people. So if we know that culture is created in the streets, when you think about the creative economy, or if you think about the cultural landscape of Brooklyn, which is the cultural epicenter of New York City, which is the cultural epicenter of the world, we have to recognize the people and where the culture is coming from. So this is how it's going to sustain, is by recognizing where culture comes from and investing in the cultural creators, the cultural stewards. That's social innovation.
For me, and I think for a lot of us in the room, wellness and healing is one of the tenets of the future, right? Centering wellness is one of the tenets of the future. Like for some people, the future is technology and big buildings, and for me, and I think a lot of us in this room, the future is healing. And so any conversation, any gathering, any fellowship, any practice process that is interested in innovating and is trying to be responsive, be a part of generating a particular vision for the future that centers healing and wellness, we have to include those practitioners, we have to include those partners, we have to include those scripts and those songs in the process and in the conversation, right? I'm really excited about building creative wellness more and more into Ifetayo, and thinking about that both in terms of like cultural traditions that speak to wellness, but also leveraging our cultural institutions and creative institutions for creating access to healing and access to healing resources. Yeah. Everything from, again, affordable health insurance to performances and workshops and demos that allow people to sort of take into their bodies and their spirits and their minds healing content.
Yeah, so I have a question for you, because I think this is a question I always wanted to ask, and I think this is a perfect opportunity. Okay. What do you mean by wellness? Like, unpack it.
What do I mean by wellness? I mean it both in parts and in confluence. Simply, one of the simplest terms that I think most people sort of understand immediately, being well in the body, being healthy, the organs are working, you have strength and languidity, that's not a word, but we're gonna take it, in your body. You can move, you're flexible, you're strong, you're well in the physical, right? But to me, wellness also speaks to an integration and a balance, right? Between the spirit and between the mind, the mental well-being. And then there's how wellness as expressed in community, wellness as expressed in the public. So one of the aspects of public wellness to me is justice. One of the aspects of public wellness is sort of infrastructure of collaboration and access to resources. A well community can funnel and shuttle its citizens to and through the services that it needs. A well community makes space for people. The refugees are safe in the well community. The children are safe in a well community, right? And so that's what I feel, and I feel like the healing, because some people want to live in healing, like forever be healed. Like, have you arrived? Have you arrived at any part of it? So the healing is not always necessarily about being on, the bad side, the dark side of some sort of pathology, but healing is about this continuous journey to be in full expression of your faculties and destiny in your particular body, and the full expression of participation and engagement in the secular body, I think. That's a developing thought.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think a lot about like healthy organizations, because one thing the pandemic has created is an individualism psychology that we need to shake, right? So you're in your body, COVID, if I get too close to this person, I'm gonna get sick. So what you worry about is your own wellness. So there's the individual wellness, but I think about the communal and organizational wellness. So how are we well in relationship with each other, right? So one of the things that's really healthy to think about as we're talking about this conversation of wellness, social innovation, and fellowship, is the nonprofit industrial complex has been toxic for a very long time. Right? It pins the stories of marginalized and oppressed people with the affluent and entitled people to use their stories to gain money. But without that unhealthiness of the oppressed people, the entitled people cannot get the money. So it creates this well of toxicity in order to create abundance.
You have to keep framing your narrative in pathology, in order to speak to a need and validity.
Yeah, so it's like, how do you break that kind of trajectory? So when I'm thinking about my leadership is how to break that. Like it needs to, like even competitions between organizations for the same funding is not well. It's toxic. So it's very toxic. So the fact that we're here, Brooklyn Arts Council and Ifetayo, is showing that we can collaborate with each other and tell stories about how we envision and want, and there's a longing for wellness in our communities, being from the communities that we're serving, not being an outsider to raise a bunch of money for the communities and kind of throw pennies at them, but no, like being from the root of that community and building a well for it, right? So thinking about that that's something that keeps me up at night. The other piece of that is how are we looking at the work that has to be done while being individually like okay and well, while making sure that as you're doing the work and as you're individually okay, that you are sensing and being cohesive with people around you and the community around you while doing the work. So it breaks the individual kind of like mentality in order to really think about the growing impact of the work and your relation to back to fellowship. Right.
I think here a lot of excuse me, I hear a lot of empathy and accountability.
Yes.
And that each one of those sort of give boundary and pathway to the other in relation to the dynamics of working inside these institutions and working with people, our colleagues in these institutions, and wanting to be sure that our programs and projects, our institutions are well, but that we are also well. We're also okay.
Indeed. Indeed. We are in crisis. Full stop, right? We have leadership crisis. However you look at it, this leadership crisis. There's affordability crisis. There is crisis of even relating to each other because we're on these devices and, we're all trying to be right and we're all trying to be well by pointing a finger at someone else's toxic without acknowledging our own toxicity. So when we are creating, I want you to really ask yourself, what are you creating for, and to answer the why for yourself. By answering the why, things will open up for you, right? Who you need to collaborate with. Because even if you're a studio painter, you're still bringing your work out to the public. There's a curator you need to work with. If you're a dancer, sure, you may dance alone on the stage, but who are you in concert with in order to dance? And so on and so forth. So thinking about who you can collaborate with that can create this kind of awareness of your practice, and also how you speak about your practice is really important, right? Because the collaboration and being in fellowship with someone allows you to ricochet your ideas back and forth, so you're not speaking just to yourself and navel gazing. The last piece is really think about the resources that are around you. You might have to break the traditional norms of being an artist, going to the stage, going to the gallery. Your work might have to exist in the streets. You may have to fund your work otherwise. But don't forget about Brooklyn Arts Council when you're funding your work, because we do have money for you, right? What we do see is that there's been a rise of applications, right? From the time when I first came, there was somewhere like 300 and something applications, and then last year was 500 and something, this year's 800 and something. So there is an arc of need from the artists in New York. Make sure your need is said out loud so the people that hoard the money know to give it to you.
Artists, creatives, cultural workers, my family, start. Finish what you start. If you stop, gentle ones, discouraged ones, mamas, babas, elders, if you stop because life has stopped you, start again. Use what you have. It does not need to be perfect. Your particular voice is invaluable, especially you with a funny voice, with a different kind of voice. You in particular, is you are talking. Use what you have. More will come. From your heart. Be brave. There is money. There are resources. NYFA, BAC, Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, Ifetayo has a space grant initiative. The resources are there. Start. Finish. And for those of you who are established, help. You didn't get there by yourself.
That's right.
Bring somebody, tell somebody, help somebody. I'm excited to see what you do.
Hey, that's awesome.
That was beautiful.
Oh.
Thank you. How do you guys do?
You okay?
We're complete.